Liadrin's earliest memories were shadowed by loss. The cries of her kin echoing through the woods of kael'thas and the cruel guttural laughter of the Amani trolls who took her parents' lives. From that grief, something fierce was forged in her. A steady, white-hot distaste for the Amani, tempered only by the guiding hand of High Priest Vandalor. In his care, she found shelter and purpose. Under his patient instruction, the mysteries of the light began to take shape, not as distant miracles, but as a living radiance, waiting to be called forth with faith and discipline. Years later, as war crept ever closer to the elven homeland, Liadrin's resolve was tested. A fresh troll incursion sent ripples of alarm across the Sunstrider realm. Together with Magister Darkhan Drathyr, whose intellect burned as sharply as any spellfire, and her apprentice, Galel, Liadrin was tasked to investigate the faltering runestones that guarded their borders. However, their journey was cut short in the half-light of dawn, when Amani raiders erupted from the underbrush, their weapons carved with ancient malice. The elves fought bravely, but it was not enough. Chieftain Zul'jin himself presided over their capture, his eyes sharp with the hunger to break the defenses of kael'thas. The ranger lor'themar Theron had also fallen into troll hands. In the choking shadows of that place, Liadrin drew upon every lesson Vandalor had instilled in her. As Zul'jin pressed for secrets, seeking cracks in the runestone wards, Liadrin did not yield. Instead, she gathered her pain, the memory of every loss, every fear, and turned it into a weapon of light. The holy power crackled outward, lancing through Zul'jin and turning his gloating sneer to shock. In that brief chaos, Darkhan, summoning what arcane strength he could, teleported the group to safety. Yet not all wounds faded so quickly. Just before being teleported to safety, Liadrin brushed against a sinister tiki mask. For an instant, the world blurred. Her mind was dragged through 3 visions, each one more chilling than the last. She saw Darkhan as a corpse, shambled and unseeing. Galel twisted and broken, his form no longer his own. And lor'themar caught in an inferno, writhing in agony. These were no idle nightmares. In time, each vision would carve itself into reality, proof that some shadows, once glimpsed, are impossible to outrun. Sometime later, in the golden halls of Silvermoon, Liadrin moved among her kin for occasions both solemn and celebratory. She stood witness to the rise of lor'themar Theron, first as Ranger Captain, then as Ranger Lord. A quiet presence at the edge of the crowd as honors were bestowed and oaths spoken beneath the banners of their people. The halls rang with promise in those moments, hope carried on the proud shoulders of those chosen to lead. During one such ceremony, High Priest Vandalor, ever watchful and fond, leaned close to her as lor'themar accepted his new mantle. With a hint of teasing, Vandalor remarked that the young Ranger Lord was certain to make some fortunate lady proud, his gaze pointedly falling on Liadrin. She met his suggestion with a wry smirk and a look that said more than words ever could. Her patience with such matchmaking long since worn thin. Sensing her meaning, Vandalor let the topic drop, excusing himself to join his old friend, Grand Magister Belliver. The 2 elders traded familiar banter. Belliver, never one to let a moment pass without a barb, scolded Vandalor for meddling when he himself had never sought marriage. Vandalor replied, half in jest and half in truth, that the opportunity had simply never presented itself. All the while, Liadrin listened nearby, until at last she gently reminded them not to speak of her as though she were absent from her own story. A response delivered with the grace of one accustomed to steering stubborn hearts. Even Sylvanas Windrunner, sharp and swift as she was, regarded Liadrin with a measure of care, though the priestess's soft-spoken ways could, on occasion, test the patience of the formidable Ranger General. Yet between them, there was a current of mutual respect, the unspoken understanding that, in Silvermoon, strength wore many faces. When the tide of the Orcish War had finally ebbed from kael'thas, its forests and rivers were left smoldering but not erased. The Amani trolls lingered like a shadow unwilling to fade. Their ancient hunger for the elven homeland was undimmed, and in the uneasy hush after the siege, their warriors haunted the borderlands, striking where hope began to return. High King Anasterian Sunstrider, unwilling to leave an old wound untended, resolved to end the Amani threat at last. He called upon the strength of his people, Not only the Farstriders and sword-bearing kin, but magi and priests, their spells and prayers braided into the bladework of war. Among those chosen for this vengeance rode Liadrin, assigned to the company of Haldoran Brightwing, whose keen eyes missed little beneath the ashen boughs. It was in a scarred and burned glade where red dragonfire still smoldered to the earth that Liadrin and Haldoran stumbled upon their enemy's heart, Zul'jin himself, chieftain of the Amani, surrounded by the broken bodies of those who had fallen to his wrath. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate, but the elven blades held true, and when the smoke cleared, Zul'jin was their captive at last. The elves, bitter from years of blood and grief, set upon the troll chieftain with a vengeance that cut deeper than steel. Their interrogations became a cruel ritual, driven by wounds old and fresh. Even Liadrin, who had lost so much to Amani raids, found herself unsettled by the harshness of the reprisal. She urged Haldoran to let mercy end what vengeance could not heal, to end Zul'jin's suffering and close the chapter for good. But fate intervened before any decision could be made. A fresh wave of Amani warriors swept into the ruined glade, their fury kindled by the sight of their captured chieftain. In the chaos, Haldoran fell wounded, and the trolls reclaimed Zul'jin, vanishing into the wilds with their leader, leaving behind only scorched earth and the bitter taste of a justice denied. As the years drifted by, Liadrin grew from apprentice to high priestess, watching her own pupil rise to stand proudly at her side, a testament to hope persisting beyond sorrow. In those days, rumors of a strange plague festered in Lor'themar, but such shadows seemed distant from the sunlit spires of kael'thas. The Elven Kingdom thrived, its people enjoying a rare span of peace and prosperity, sheltered by caution and a growing reluctance to entwine their fate with the turbulent realms of man. Liadrin, reflecting on the quiet wisdom of distance, found herself grateful for the boundaries her people had drawn. Yet peace is usually borrowed, and the cost comes due eventually. Whispers of unease seeped through Silvermoon as King Anasterian, his health failing, became haunted by troubling reports brought to him in hushed voices by his advisors. Liadrin could sense his concern growing heavier, a shadow crossing even the brightest halls. It was not long before the reason revealed itself. The dead had begun to march. The scourge swept across Lor'themar, led by the prince-turned-traitor Arthas Menethil, whose blade had silenced a kingdom and now hungered for the Sunwell's light. When the undead army pressed into kael'thas, Liadrin found herself within Silvermoon's walls as a tide of terror rolled over the land. She watched, disbelieving, as phalanxes of the dead moved with terrible purpose through ancient woods that had never known such blasphemy. Arthas came to Silvermoon's gate, his demand echoing like a curse. Open the city and accept the gift of eternal servitude, or see every beloved soul put to the sword. Yet with Anasterian's will and the Sunwell's radiance, the elves stood unmoving for the monster in front of them. The gates remained shut, defiance burning in every heart, even as Arthas began his siege, prepared for blood and ruin. The horror struck close when the broken form of Sylvanas Windrunner, once their indomitable ranger general, was paraded before the city, a ghostly mockery, her spirit twisted by those she once hunted. The sight filled Liadrin with dread for what further atrocities might come. As the assault battered Silvermoon, Liadrin turned her fear into purpose, tending to the wounded amid chaos and falling stone. Faith wavered as the light was drowned out by screams and shadow, but she pressed on, barely saving Grand Magister Belliver as he marshaled a desperate defense in Sylvanas' absence. With the city's fate sealed, Belliver gave orders to evacuate soldiers to the Isle of Quel'Danas, where King and Sunwell made their final stand. Liadrin joined the retreat, bracing herself for whatever fate would claim her homeland next. The Sunwell was a source of the elves' power and pride, and it had been unmoored by the greatest of betrayals. Darkhan, once a magister of renown, had turned his back on kael'thas and shackled the Sunwell's radiance for the scourge. In the thick of war's confusion, Liadrin could not quiet her dread. How would Arthas bridge the ocean and press the assault deeper still? Her answer came with a chill that split the dawn. The Death Knight summoned a path of frost across the waves, ushering the dead onward. It was here that Liadrin was reunited with Vandalor, her mentor and adopted father. as the final defense gathered for the reckoning to come. The battle for the Sunwell raged with unrelenting fury. Side by side, Liadrin and Vandalor poured their light into Grand Magister Belivar's wounds, struggling to hold back the darkness. Yet even their combined prayers could not shield him from Arthas's relentless onslaught. The Grand Magister was struck down, torn from the fight, his body left broken among the fallen. Vandalor, heedless of Liadrin's desperate pleas, rushed once more to Belivar's side. Meanwhile, Liadrin was forced to witness the last desperate stand between Anasterian Sunstrider and the Scourge's champion. When the king fell, the sun itself seemed to dim. Liadrin found her father just as a monstrous abomination struck him down. Grief surged as she rushed to help, but before death could claim her as well, Belivar summoned his last breath of magic to whisk her away from the ruin despite being wounded beyond hope, saving her life with a final spell. Safe but shattered, Liadrin was far from the Sunwell when it was defiled, Kael'thas's resurrection staining its waters and legacy both. Arthas, his work complete, cast Darkon aside and left kael'thas in ashes. The loss was more than ruin and death. Throughout the siege, Liadrin's prayers for the light faltered, her connection strained to breaking. Even as she clung to memory and faith, desperate to call forth power from within. When she needed it most, the light did not answer, leaving her bereft and hollow as the invasion's last echoes faded. Racked with guilt and unable to besiege the light, Liadrin returned to the battered survivors of Silvermoon, reporting that Amani forces now threatened to seize the ruined well. Following the assault, Prince kael'thas returned to his homeland's ruin, prepared for a final, terrible assault to destroy what darkness remained. When Liadrin volunteered to stand with him, it was not as priestess, but as a warrior. She asked lor'themar for a weapon and for training, casting aside vestments for steel. With kael'thas and a handful of survivors, many destined to become the first of the Blood Knights, Liadrin marched on kael'thas. There, amid the horror and fury, she faced her old mentor and father once more, risen by the Scourge as a twisted mockery. With sorrow and resolve, she laid him to rest. As the prince and his magi shattered the corrupted Sunwell, the company fell back, the land's light extinguished, but its soul not yet broken. In the aftermath, kael'thas gave new purpose to the scattered High Elves, proclaiming them reborn as the Sin'dorei, the Blood Elves, in memory of all they had lost. In this shattered dawn, Liadrin would find a new path, her faith forever changed, yet her resolve sharpened by tragedy. And amid the city's ruins, she became a quiet anchor and friend to Illyria's son, Eretor, offering hope where so much had been consumed by shadow. 5 years had passed since the black tide of the Scourge swept over kael'thas. Yet the weight of that day clung to Liadrin like ash that would not wash away. Each morning in the Ghostlands, she awoke to the bitter taste of guilt, the memory of her failure to shield her homeland, the loss of her brethren and the mentors who had shaped her, and the quiet shame that she herself had survived when so many had not. The shattering of the Sunwell had left a hunger gnawing at her soul, a void only faintly quieted by the arcane relics she gathered from whatever sources she could find. Her sanctuary was a crumbling manor house, its grandeur long since given over to ruin. Now it was just a lonely area on the haunted edge of the world. Liadrin made her living with steel instead of prayer now. The gentle trappings of priesthood had been set aside for armor and sword. She had helped reclaim the golden boughs of Eversong, but when others turned to the slow work of rebuilding, Liadrin could not rest, not while the Scourge still prowled the southern Ghostlands, and the traitor Darkon Drathir remained at large. Driven by grief and burning fury, she hunted the undead with relentless purpose, every blow a quiet promise to the fallen, Vandalor, Belivar, and all the others whose blood had stained the stones of kael'thas. Arthas was beyond her reach, but Darkon was a wound left festering, one she was determined to close. Through it all, she found herself supplied with arcane objects from a benefactor who kept to the shadows. She suspected the hand behind these gifts, but did not speak the name aloud. Some truths were best left unchased for a while longer. Liadrin's vigilance stretched beyond the haunted woods. She alone counted herself among the few who knew of Prince kael'thas' secret alliance with Illidan Stormrage. The elves' thirst for the arcane, once a gentle undercurrent, had become a desperate tide. Mana crystals and draining spells now commonplace, even necessary. Yet Liadrin harbored deep reservations. She saw the path that kael'thas had begun to walk, the shadow of fell magic curling at the edges, promising strength but demanding a price. It left her uneasy for the future of her people, and for the prince himself. The light no longer answered her, but her eyes burned a bright, unnatural green, a mark of the struggle within, and the arcane forces now woven through her veins. Even as hope withered, Liadrin pressed onward, her heart bound to vengeance and the slender promise that one day justice would come for every soul lost to betrayal and ruin. When Haldoran Brightwing, ever the keen-eyed ranger, found her at the manor's threshold, Liadrin nearly struck him down, mistaking friend for foe in the haunted quiet of the Ghostlands. With a dry laugh, Haldoran led her through sun-dappled streets towards Sunfury's spire, the royal palace at Silvermoon's heart, where change and memory lingered in equal measure. To Liadrin's disbelief, the city she had mourned now shone with life. Its golden spires and busy walkways pulsed with energy of reclamation. The pain of loss softened, if only for a moment. There, within vaulted halls, she found lor'themar Theron once more, ranger, regent, and kin bound by shared wounds. Yet before old friends could truly speak, Grand Magister Romoth arrived, carrying the weight of a new purpose. Romoth, heir to Belivar's legacy, brought a proposition that would shape the course of their people. Prince kael'thas, now far from Quel'Thalas, had sent a subdued Naru, Muru, back across the sea, a vessel of light to be drawn upon for magic. But Romoth, Astalor Bloodsworn, and their fellow magisters saw a greater destiny, not to simply drain the being, but to forge a new order with its power at the core. He spoke to Liadrin of the life she had led, priestess and warrior both, forever pulled between gentleness and wrath. Placing a blood-tempered ranseur in her hands, a weapon born of sacrifice and resolve, Romoth offered her a third path, one that would never see her abandoned by the light, nor separated from her strength. Guided to the chamber where Muru pulsed, contained yet undimmed, Liadrin stood at the threshold of something wholly new. With Romoth and Astalor at her side, she reached out to the Naru, forging a connection with the being's holy essence. As light coursed through her veins, Liadrin found no warmth or love in its embrace, only raw and inexorable power, a force to be mastered, if she could bear its burden. Accepting the challenge, she allowed Muru's radiance to suffuse her, becoming the first of the Blood Knights. In that moment, a new era for the elves was born, one forged from pain, courage, and the promise of never again being left powerless beneath a pitiless sky. As Blood Knight matriarch, Liadrin bore a mantle both proud and heavy, shaping her new order in the fires of purpose and controversy alike. The streets of Silvermoon shimmered with their old beauty, but many eyes turned cold at the sight of the crimson-clad knights. Their means to wield the light by drawing power from a captive Naru sparked whispers and disdain among kin who still clung to the memory of gentler days. Yet as Liadrin watched her knights train, a complex pride tempered her thoughts. She could not help but reflect on her own long devotion to the light, once a servant, now a master of its power and free of its judgment. In the reclaimed ruins of Sunsail Anchorage, Liadrin led her knights, Vranish, Siessa Dawnrose, Malar Dawnblade, Baki, and others, through their first true test as an order. They worked in concert to drive out the wretched, their discipline honed not by the light's blessing, but by Liadrin's will and the hard lessons of loss. Still, the gratitude she hoped for from Silvermoon remained distant. Siessa, stung by the city's scorn, gave voice to her anger, but Liadrin counseled patience. Time, she promised, would prove the worth of their pain. Later, in the Hall of Blood, shadows fell long across the polished stone when a familiar face appeared. Galel, once her apprentice, now drawn to the order he once shunned. Arcane hunger had marked him deeper than most, and he sought a measure of deliverance in the light once more, hoping perhaps to redeem what had been lost. Liadrin, steady and honest, warned him that there was little warmth left in the light they commanded. If he wished to feel it, he would have to seize it, not wait for grace to descend. The road ahead would be hard, she promised, and would demand nothing less than obedience from those who called themselves Blood Knights. News arrived from the Farstriders, which drew Liadrin from the city's comfort. A surge in scourge activity near the ruins of Darkhan Drathir's old lair called for investigation. With a company of her knights, Liadrin found a hidden trapdoor and a diary marked by symbols unknown. Perhaps a clue, perhaps a warning. She took it with her, a puzzle to be unraveled in time. Later, within the quiet of lor'themar's office, she found the regent at his table, hands deftly fletching arrows. A sign that even leaders must keep their hands busy to soothe their thoughts. He confessed his doubts about the Blood Knights, but admitted too that perhaps their creation had been necessary for the times. Liadrin caught sight of a letter, the mark of the Horde bold upon its seal, and lor'themar spoke of his cautious dealings with this new alliance. Liadrin weighed the prospect of the Horde with an open mind, though she could not quite lay to rest her unease about Sylvanas Windrunner, hero once but changed by war's long shadow. In the end, lor'themar, though wary, hoped the Blood Knights might yet rise to greatness, earning the esteem of both their people and their new allies. Liadrin and Solinar kept watch over the dark shell of Darkhan's former residence, the ruined walls thick with secrets and the scent of old magic. Kael'thas, once steady and eager, had vanished into the gloom. As night settled, Liadrin traced a grisly trail, a thread of blood and torn flesh winding through the ruined halls. She found Kael'thas at its end, trembling and covered in the gore of trolls, his eyes wild and distant. In the days that followed, Darkhan's diaries were painstakingly unraveled, revealing a scheme wrapped in old rivalries. An elusive figure called Thadur, the name soon recognized as Drathir turned inside out, sought the artifacts Belliver had forged in the age of the Troll Wars. The stones of light, flame, and spark. These relics, if claimed, could tip the balance against the Scourge, which explained the urgency in finding them before the Sin'dorei could intervene. Determined, Liadrin informed lor'themar of her intent to bait this shadowy foe. Halloran brought darker tidings. Zul'jin and the Amani were stirring again within Zul'Amon's walls. The air in Silvermoon grew heavier. Liadrin was summoned to the city after witnessing a chilling sight. Orovin, an elf, found hanged from the Shepherd's Gate, his life brutally ended. Rumors clawed at the Blood Knights. Some whispered that Kael'thas was to blame, having seen fleeing beneath moonlight and since disappeared. Grand Magister Romoth, pressed by negotiations with kael'thas and the Horde, left the charge of unraveling the truth to Liadrin, warning that it must be settled before his return. The Order speculated anxiously. Was it the hunger for magic, or the constant whisper of Muru that had broken Kael'thas's mind? Yet the trap meant for Darkhan proved to be no snare at all, but the opening move of another's game. The truth came cold. The Lich King, watching from Northrend, had dispatched Darkhan, no longer merely traitor, but now lich-like and reeking of death, to seize the Blood Knights for his own designs. As lor'themar and Haldoran clashed with Darkhan in the dark, Liadrin slipped away to seek out her lost apprentice. Deep within the old troll's sacrificial chamber, she found Kael'thas, ruined, barely clinging to himself. His form wasted and eyes burning with desperation. He confessed to murder, lost to a spiral of arcane withdrawal and Muru's unyielding voice in his mind. Mad with agony, he lashed out at Liadrin, forcing her into a terrible fight. She had no choice but to end him right there, but the victory brought no solace. As Kael'thas fell, his broken words haunted her. Had she chosen the right path, or simply traded one form of torment for another? The question lingered, sharp as any blade, as Silvermoon's torches guttered in the gathering dark. By the time the dark portal opened again to Outland, Liadrin's path had brought her home to the heart of Silvermoon, where within the blood-red sanctum of the Order she had forged, she made her quarters next to the subdued form of Muru, the silent wellspring of the Blood Knight's power. Every day, Liadrin guided new aspirants, her commands shaping their hands for war and their minds for sacrifice. Some were sent to raise coin for the Order, others dispatched southward to strike at the Scourge in the haunted wilds of kael'thas and the blighted Plaguelands. The blood-red banners of the Order had long been met with suspicion. For years, whispers haunted the halls of Silvermoon, rumors that the Blood Knights were but shadows in borrowed radiance. wielding power they did not truly understand. Yet pride, that old elven stubbornness, burned brighter than any sun, and Lady Liadrin would see her order vindicated in the eyes of all who doubted. Word was sent on crimson wings across kael'thas. Gather any and all knights available, as they were needed for a bold undertaking conceived by Lord lor'themar Bloodwrath, whose vision for the Blood Knights was unyielding. This was no mere ritual or show of faith. It was to be a living testament, a demonstration that their command of the light surpassed the tired dogmas of the Silver Hand. The call led them beyond their homeland, south through haunted passes and blighted forests, to a city whose wounds had never healed, Stratholme, where the air itself tasted of ash, and the sky glowed with a ceaseless internal fire. It had burned since the culling, flames licking at stone and memory alike, refusing the solace of extinguishment. Within this smoldering ruin at the city's wary heart stood Alon's chapel, a sanctuary wreathed in tragedy and miracle. Inside waited Arius, a paladin bound by cruel necessity. He could not step beyond the chapel's doors, for the light's flame held his curse at bay. If he crossed the threshold, he would fall into undeath, transformed forever into a death knight. The sacred fire, eternal, unyielding, kept the darkness at bay and his soul intact. It was here, in this crucible of faith and sorrow, that the Blood Knights arrived with their hard-won materials. Solinar's concoction shimmered with forbidden promise, its purpose simple and audacious: to unmake the eternal flame, to cast aside the protection of tradition, and in its place assert a new supremacy. If they succeeded, the message would echo beyond Stratholme's broken walls. The Blood Knights did not merely channel the light, they commanded it. Their power, born of sacrifice and defiance, was not only real, but greater than any who clung to the old ways dared imagine. So they set about their task, shadows flickering against stone as fire met faith. The concoction brewed by Solinar glimmered in the dim light, a symbol of their defiance and ambition. With careful hands and unwavering resolve, the Blood Knights approached the altar at the heart of Alon's chapel. They worked in silence, pouring the mixture upon the sacred flame, watching as its golden glow flickered, sputtering, and at last died. In that instant, the old sanctuary lost its shield, and the light's ancient ward unraveled, leaving only silence and the acrid scent of extinguished hope. Arius, bound so long to the chapel's embrace, stood powerless. The magic that had kept his curse at bay faded with the dying flame. The Blood Knights drew their blades and struck him down. In his fall, the air grew colder, as if the city itself recoiled from what had been done. As Arius's lifeblood darkened the stones, 5 spectral figures took shape, paladins of an age gone by, summoned in wrath and sorrow. Their armor shone with ghostly radiance, their voices thundered like distant bells as they demanded justice for the desecration of their sacred ground. But the Blood Knights stood resolute, each specter charged with righteous fury, seeking to drive back those who defied the old order. Steel met spirit, light clashed against light's own inheritors. The struggle raged beneath the ruined vaults, ancient vows clashing with the will of the living. One by one, the spectral paladins faltered. The Blood Knights pressed forward, their conviction unbroken, their unity unshaken. With each victory, their own bond to the light seemed to flare brighter, not dimmer, as if the power they wielded grew fiercer for every challenge faced and overcome. At last, silence returned to the chapel. The ghosts faded, defeated, not merely by force of arms, but by the unwavering resolve of those who had come to prove themselves. The Blood Knights gathered what they needed, bearing no trophies, only the memory of firelight and the knowledge of a trial survived. They left Stratholme as champions of a new path, bearing word and witness that their order's command of the light was not a borrowed miracle, but a birthright forged in the crucible of defiance and triumph. Following their display of power over the light, the Order's growing influence was dealt a grievous blow when word spread of Prince kael'thas' betrayal. His soul bartered to the Burning Legion, his hand the one to steal Muru from Silvermoon's heart. Liadrin saw the treachery with her own eyes, her faith and fury mingling as her order stood suddenly powerless, its source of light ripped away. Desperation drove her from Silvermoon's gilded towers to the shining city of Shatroth, where the Naru Adal waited. In the calm radiance of that place, Liadrin laid bare her doubts and her longing for hope. Adal spoke of Muru's purpose, how the Naru had long foreseen his fate, suffering the elves' arrogance so that it might lead to redemption. Even Prophet Velen had glimpsed the tapestry of fate that Meru's sacrifice would weave. This revelation changed something in Liadrin. The light was no longer a thing to be seized by force, but a gift to be honored, even when hard won and dearly paid. With her faith transformed, Liadrin renounced her allegiance to House Sunstrider and took up arms alongside the Shattered Sun offensive. On the blood-soaked stones of kael'thas, she resolved to see kael'thas' madness ended and her homeland's hope rekindled. In her absence, Lord Solinar Bloodwrath assumed command of the training halls, forging new masters from the next generation of knights. Grand Magister Romoth took up the Order's cause at Sunfury Spire, wielding politics where Liadrin once wielded presence. But everywhere her name was whispered, a promise lingered in the shadows. One last dawn for Silvermoon, if only her people could endure the darkness before it. Upon the scarred stones of kael'thas, the fate of the Sin'dorei hung in the balance. kael'thas Sunstrider drew upon the stolen radiance of Meru, the living light of Anvina Teague, and the torrents of wild arcane force harvested from the mana forges. With these, he twisted the Sunwell itself into a monstrous gateway, summoning forth Kil'jaeden the Deceiver, Lord of the Burning Legion, intent on damning all of kael'thas for his ambition. The Isle trembled as the Shattered Sun offensive met the Betrayer's forces in battle. At their vanguard, Liadrin moved with unwavering resolve, wielding the lessons of pain and hope alike. She and her allies threw themselves against kael'thas' spellwork, unraveling his schemes just long enough for the champions of both Horde and Alliance to turn the tide. When the dust of battle settled, kael'thas lay defeated in the depths of the Magister's Terrace, Meru's light snuffed, and Kil'jaeden himself banished by mortal hands. With the storm's power diminished, Liadrin stood beside Prophet Velen before the Sunwell, now corrupted and seething with shadow. Regret gnawed at her heart. She mourned for Meru, the arrogance that had led their people to chain the light, and for the wound their actions had carved into the soul of kael'thas. Yet Velen saw hope where despair threatened to take root. Drawing forth the unblemished heart of the fallen Naru, he channeled its pure brilliance into the corrupted well. The light answered, meeting arcane power in a surge of grace. In that moment, the Sunwell was reborn. A radiant source of both magic and holy energy, its illumination washing over forest and spire, promising renewal to all who beheld it. The change brought out by the Sunwell's cleansing rippled through the heart of the Sin'dorei. For Liadrin and her Blood Knights, the lesson was profound. No longer did they seek to force the light to their will. Instead, they returned to the old ways, embracing its warmth as something freely given and dearly treasured. The road ahead remained steep. Yet with the Sunwell blazing anew and her faith restored, Liadrin dedicated herself to a new purpose, breaking the chains of magical hunger that bound her people and guided the Blood Elves toward the greatness they had lost, toward a dawn no longer marred by the shadows of their past. When the time came to heal the legendary blade Quel'Dalar, chosen adventurers are granted rare passage into the sacred heart of kael'thas. Haldoran Brightwing himself saw them through the guarded threshold and beyond the shimmering wards of the Sunwell Plateau. A hush settled, deep and reverent, broken only by the quiet steps of pilgrims gathered beneath the renewed well. There, among the golden banners and crystalline light, Lady Liadrin stood before a circle of Blood Elf faithful. Her words carried the weight of one who had wandered through darkness and found her way back to dawn. She spoke not of past glories, but of the battles yet to come, the trials still facing the Sin'dorei as they rebuilt their place in a world forever changed. Yet in her voice was hope, bright and unshaken, shaped by the sight of the Sunwell burning anew with holy radiance. No longer a figure hardened by loss, Liadrin guided those who would walk the Paladin's path, teaching them to reach for the light with open hands and hearts. Her lessons rang clear within the Sunwell's glow. True strength came not from bending the light to one's will, but from letting its grace flow through them, mending what the long years of war had torn apart. In the sanctum's glow, a new generation listened, ready to step forward, led by a matriarch who had learned hope again. When the drums of war sounded upon distant Draenor, Liadrin rode at the vanguard, her banner unfurled next to heroes of both Horde and Alliance. With Thrall, Khadgar, and a company forged from old rivals and new allies, she passed beneath the altar dark portal, stepping into a land twisted by time and scarred by iron. The jungle of Tanaan erupted in chaos, the Iron Horde's cruelty painted in ash and blood. Liadrin's heart recoiled at the savagery of their war engines, the relentless pursuit of conquest at any cost. Yet she did not falter. Through smoke and shadow, she cut a path for wounded frost wolves and battered Draenei, wielding both blade and light to shield those who fled the slaughter. In the fray against the Shadowmoon clan, she crossed paths with Yrel, a captive burning with the promise of something greater. With resolve, Liadrin led her back to their embattled fellowship, the flame of hope undimmed even as the dark portals shattered behind them. Their journey brought them to Frostfire Ridge, where icy winds carried the memory of loss and determination. There, Liadrin marshaled the Sunsworn, her order of Blood Knights, crimson-clad and unyielding. When word reached her of a new threat rising in Talador, she did not hesitate. Demons had been sent near Auchindoun, the holiest sanctuary of the Draenei dead. Liadrin answered the call, riding with her knights to stand beside Exarch Maladar and the Auchenai. In the shadow of Auchindoun's gleaming spires, she vowed that not a single demon would cross the sacred threshold while she yet drew breath. The Burning Legion's advance would be broken here, or all of Draenor might fall to shadow. Liadrin directed the Horde's champions with iron resolve, driving the Legion back and ensuring Gul'dan's grasp would not defile the spirit well at the heart of the Draenei faith. When the shadows over Auchindoun deepened and Terrangor revealed himself as the architect of the Council's treachery, Liadrin fought fiercely alongside Exarch Maladar, driving the Shadow Council's minions from the hollowed mausoleum. Only when the threat had subsided did she return to the Sunsworn camp, her mind already turning to the next move in this relentless war. Joined by Astalor Bloodsworn, Liadrin relocated to Retribution Point, where she and Maladar would gather strength and watch over Auchindoun's newly fortified walls. Word soon reached them of dire need at the remains of Xandros, where the land itself bore the scars of Anilian fury. With Astalor and Maladar at her side, Liadrin arrived as the Pit Lord Mongrathod threatened to crush all hope beneath his hooves. Maladar's magic bound the beast in place, while Liadrin summoned the light in a blazing torrent, striking the Pit Lord down and sending the demon's essence screaming into the void. With the battle won, she dispatched Night Lord Dranaris with tidings of victory to War Chief Vol'jin, ensuring the tale of their defiance would cross the worlds back to Azeroth. But Draenor knew no peace. Shattrath City fell under the onslaught of the Shadow Council and the corrupted Sargerai. Rallying her Blood Knights, Liadrin joined the Auchenai and the Shatari defense atop the Spire of Light, turning blade and prayer against the invaders. When Othar's lieutenants lay dead, she challenged the traitor, standing with Maladar as they confronted the former Exarch in a duel of power and will. With Othar's fall, Liadrin saw hope kindling anew, that the Akani would reclaim their sacred city. Through each trial, her resolve only deepened. Liadrin was later counted among the Horde's leaders at the gates of Tanaan, standing unflinching as they faced War Chief Gromosh after the last fury of Azuka had ebbed from the battlefield. In every victory and every wound, she bore the weight of her order and her people unyielding, and ever faithful that the light would guide them through even the deepest shadows. In the wake of the calamity at the Broken Shore, shadows hung heavy across Azeroth. Liadrin, accompanied by Romoth, journeyed to the sun-baked land of Durotar, where the pyres of mourning blazed for fallen War Chief Vol'jin. As the ashes settled, Sylvanas Windrunner stood before the gathered horde, the mantle of War Chief resting on her shoulders, her gaze fixed and unyielding, the weight of countless battles in her eyes. Among the silent witnesses, Liadrin stood resolute, marking the passing of one age and the uneasy dawn of another. Her duties soon called her north, to the floating city of Dalaran. There, in a council of faith and steel, Liadrin joined the leaders of Azeroth's Paladin orders, before descending beneath the earth to the Sanctum of Light. This hidden refuge, nestled in the ancient stone beneath Light's Hope Chapel, became the heart of a new order. With solemn vows, she pledged the strength of the Blood Knights to the reformed Knights of the Silver Hand and their newly chosen High Lord. Lord Maxwell Tyrosus, his voice steady with respect, named Liadrin as second captain to the High Lord, her conviction shining as a beacon among her peers. But darkness is never far. When the Death Knights of the Ebon Blade struck, their blades cold with the chill of undeath, Liadrin and her order stood as the final bulwark between Tyrion Fordring's tomb. She faced the Death Lord of the Ebon Blade in bitter combat beneath the Sanctum's vaulted stones. Overcome, she fell, yet even in defeat her faith did not yield. As the Ebon Blade began their foul rite, seeking to drag Tyrion's soul from the light, The holy power of the sanctum lashed out. Darian Mograin's mortal form shattered by the force of that divine retribution. Liadrin's words rang out, sharp with scorn. The Ebon Blade were fools to seek dominion in ground so hallowed, for not even the Lich King himself held sway here. Broken, the Death Lord and their horsemen fled through a hastily conjured death gate, leaving with only Darian's body. In the trials that followed, Liadrin fought at the High Lord's side. If the Champion of the Light was a paladin, she joined them at the battle for the Exodar, standing with Maxwell Tyrosus against the encroaching shadow. There, among shattered crystals and the Song of Ancient Light, she was briefly reunited with Prophet Velen, whose approval shone clear, pleased to see how far Liadrin had come since the Sunwell's cleansing. The streets of Suramar trembled beneath the banners of rebellion, and at their head strode Lady Liadrin and her Blood Knights, flanked by Romoth and his circle of magisters. They had come at the behest of the Nightfallen, the city's exiled children, to tip the balance against the Legion's cruel puppeteers. In the shadowed corridors and ancient courtyards, Liadrin saw echoes of kael'thas, her people's own long struggle with addiction and the wounds of betrayal. Of all the champions gathered, she believed the Sin'dorei understood the Nightfallen's suffering most keenly. Determined to stoke hope in the hearts of a wary populace, Liadrin ordered bulletins and posters set upon the marble columns and winding stairways of Suramar. The Horde's arrival was no secret. She wished every Nightborn to see and to remember that salvation could be won even after the darkest fall. She found common cause with Tyrande Whisperwind, the Kaldorei general, whose own sentinels had answered the call to war. Together, their forces slipped through the veiled avenues, gathering knowledge and steel for the coming assault. Yet unity did not come without friction. Among the Alliance camp, Liadrin's gaze turned sharp. She would not allow Varisa Windrunner to shield the Coalition's flank, wary of vengeance clouding the Ranger's judgment. Nor did she believe Tyrande's sentinels suited to the direct fury of the city's main engagement. The shadows were their home, not the blood-soaked thoroughfares ahead. In the War Council, Liadrin stood unyielding, insisting that only the Blood Knights possessed the resolve and readiness to bear the true weight of this conflict. As night deepened over Suramar, it was her order that would lead the charge, their resolve burning as fierce as the banners unfurling above the city's gilded rooftops. As war drew near, Liadrin and Romoth answered the summons to council, meeting beneath the banners of rebellion with Archmage Khadgar and First Arcanist Tharisra at the heart of the Nightfallen camp. Liadrin spoke plainly to Tharisra, her words heavy with memory. The plight of the Shal'dorei echoed the trials of the Sin'dorei, and in that reflection she pledged her knights to the cleansing of Suramar streets, vowing that no trace of the Legion would remain when dawn broke over the spires. On the eve of battle, old rivalries simmered in the firelight. Even Liadrin and Tyrande found themselves forced to admit, a touch of shame softening their voice, that their kin had begun to trade jests and barbs, insults growing sharper as anxiety brewed. Fearing that pride might tip to violence, they sent trusted adventurers to scour both camps for offending items, hoping to still tempers before steel or spells were drawn in anger. When the moon reached its zenith, the allied elves rallied beneath the walls of Suramar. Side by side, Liadrin and her Blood Elves marched with Tharisra and the Shal'dorei, while Tyrande's forces and the Quel'dorei lent their own blades to the cause. The host broke through the city's defenses, storming the causeways to the very foot of the Nighthold. But at the threshold, they were met by Grand Magistrix Elisande herself. Turning her cold gaze upon Liadrin, Elisande expressed a bitter disappointment that the Sin'dorei of all elves should stand against her, when she believed they alone might have understood the weight of her sacrifice. With a word and a sweep of her staff, Elisande unleashed her mastery of time, freezing the united elven army in a shimmering stasis. Liadrin's spirit strained against the enchantment, and only when Khadgar returned in a flash of arcane might did she and Tyrande break free. The rest of their companions, however, remained trapped upon the Nighthold steps. Statues in a lost moment, the battle wrested from their grasp. Undaunted, Liadrin took her place in the siege that followed, fighting through the chaos as Illidan Stormrage delivered Gul'dan to his end. In the aftermath, she witnessed the Nightwells fading with Tharisra and her closest advisors. As the eye of Aman'Thul's power receded, the great font of Suramar teetered on the brink of destruction. Liadrin watched as Tharisra made her choice, allowing the Nightwell to perish so her people might be free. It was a decision that stirred Liadrin's respect. She believed that in time, the Nightborn would overcome the Nightwell's call and find strength anew. When Prophet Velen called for champions to reclaim the Exodar and strike against the Legion, Liadrin answered without hesitation, rallying the Horde's might beneath her crimson banner. She led her warriors across the sea from Orgrimmar to Azuremyst aboard the Sunstrider, the vessel gliding through mists and memory toward a destiny written in stars. Upon the sacred shores, the Blood Elves joined the Draenei and their kin, setting foot upon the Vindicar, which carried them beyond the broken blue of Azeroth, casting them onto the ashen wastes of Argus. There, amid shattered ground and skies painted with green fire, Silgrin walked beside Liadrin. The ruined world, still trembling beneath the shadow of eons old sorrow, stirred his heart to reflection. He confessed how the sight of Argus forced him to reckon with what doom might have befallen the Sin'dorei. He wondered aloud how her people had endured and emerged into the light. Liadrin spoke with quiet pride, her gaze steady, telling of the Horde's resilience and how through hardship and alliance, the Blood Elves had found both strength and future beyond despair. Silgrin listened, the words kindling a new resolve within him, and thanked her for the wisdom she offered. In the wastes of Darkfall Ridge, where the Legion's fury still threatened to break upon the Vindicar's hull, Liadrin stood as shield and avenger, her blade and light a beacon against the night as she defended her allies and struck down demon after demon. The weight of her order and her people carried forward into the heart of darkness. With the last embers of the Legion's war fading, Orgrimmar's great hall pulsed with laughter and quiet relief. At a private feast, Lady Liadrin took her place beside lor'themar and the assembled leaders of the Horde, their victories tempered by memory, the taste of peace as sharp as wine after years of ash. In the days that followed, Liadrin's bond with the Nightborn of Suramar only deepened. Thalyssra's return had kindled new hope among her people, and the kinship between the Shal'dorei and the Sin'dorei grew as naturally as spring after a long frost. Liadrin and lor'themar, recognizing mirrored histories and shared wounds, moved to weave a lasting alliance. When Warchief Sylvanas summoned the council to seek new allies, Liadrin championed the Nightborn, speaking of their resilience and the strength Suramar might lend to the Horde. Sylvanas, her gaze measuring, saw promise in the union and gave her blessing. Bearing a formal invitation from Silvermoon, Liadrin journeyed once more to Thalyssra's estate. She greeted the first Arcanist not just as an envoy but as a friend. Together they spoke of trust and betrayal, of the Alliance's coldness and the scars it left. Thalyssra, weighing the compassion and respect shown by Liadrin against the grudging welcome of Tyrande, accepted the path to Silvermoon. Within the sunlit halls of the Blood Elf capital, Liadrin brought Thalyssra before Regent Lord lor'themar Therin, forging a bond that would alter the fate of the kingdoms. Within the sunlit halls of the Blood Elf capital, Liadrin brought Thalyssra before Regent Lord lor'themar, forging a bond that would alter the fate of kingdoms. Among the gathered was Alleria Windrunner, her presence a living link to battles fought side by side on Argus. She and Liadrin exchanged words of understanding, old enemies now bound by shared purpose beneath the banners of a new dawn. Together, they crossed the ancient roads of kael'thas. Liadrin, lor'themar, Romoth, Alleria, and the Nightborn, each step drawing them nearer to the Sunwell's heart. As silver leaves whispered above, Liadrin explained to Alleria how the well's essence, once shattered and reborn, now flowed with both arcane might and the light itself, its power a lifeline for the Sin'dorei. Yet within the sanctum, destiny bent upon a knife's edge. Alleria, changed by the void she had embraced on distant Argus, stepped near the shimmering waters. In that instant, corruption burst forth, tendrils of void clawing for the Sunwell's radiance. Horrors erupted into the sacred chamber. Together, Liadrin and her allies drew steel and spell, battling the swarm of void spawn as a monstrous shade clawed its way into the world. It was a fight at the threshold of hope and oblivion. Blades flashed and light seared the darkness, while Romoth, Alleria, and Thalyssra channeled their combined will to seal the rift. For a breathless moment, the fate of the Sunwell hung in the balance, until the void was driven back, the chamber ringing with exhausted triumph. In the battle's wake, Thalyssra pledged Suramar's allegiance to the Horde, and at Liadrin's side she journeyed to Orgrimmar to lay this new allegiance before Warchief Sylvanas. Sometime later, Magni Bronzebeard summoned the champions of Azeroth. It was time to draw the darkness from the great sword of Sargeras using the legendary weapons adventurers had acquired in their journey. and it was Liadrin who carried the Ashbringer, her blade bright with the legacy of the Silver Hand, shouldering that sacred trust in the stead of any who could not. As the Fourth War ignited, the banners of kael'thas were unfurled on the fields of Stromgarde, Liadrin at their head, crimson tabard gleaming in the standard of the Blood Knights borne high. She led her kin with unshakable resolve, the sins and scars of past wars etched into every command she gave. Across the smoke-choked battlefield, the Order of the Silver Hand, now pledged once more to the Alliance, marched under Turalian's banner. There, amid the roar of war, old traditions clashed with the changing tides. Turalian words were edged with disbelief and scorn, mocking the notion of a paladin at the Horde's helm, vowing to show no mercy to what he called a misguided champion of the enemy. The war would mark every heart, yet Liadrin's purpose endured beyond battle. Alongside lor'themar, she guided the Blood Elves of Silvermoon through the sacred rite of remembrance, an annual ritual to honor those lost to the Scourge's shadow. Within the golden light of heritage and sorrow, she spoke to her people of what it meant to bear the name Sin'dorei, to walk through darkness and rise, redeemed by hope and the light's return. At the Sunwell's edge, she stood with them, shepherding the ceremony's final moments on the holy ground of kael'thas, ensuring every hero received the honor of their heritage armor, a symbol of endurance, loss, and renewal. The storm of war followed them south to the battered walls of Zuldazar. When Horde champions boarded the Alliance's gunship, Liadrin was a voice of steel, urging them to strike boldly and show no hesitation. When the thunder of cannon and flame finally faded, she bid the wary victors pause, if only for a breath. While others pressed the attack, her gaze always turned toward the next challenge. When the drums of war at last fell silent at the gates of Orgrimmar, Liadrin stood among the mourners at Varrock Sourfang's funeral, the cost of peace written on every face. In the quiet aftermath, she gathered her company of Blood Knights and marched into the heart of Orgrimmar. Her orders were clear and uncompromising. Root out any taint of N'Zoth's corruption, show mercy to those who renounced Sylvanas, and safeguard the fragile unity that still bound the city together. Even in the war's shadow, Liadrin remained the unbroken blade and steady heart of her people, ever guarding the path forward beneath the crimson banners of kael'thas. A grim wind swept through kael'thas, carrying whispers of the Scourge risen anew. Liadrin traveled to Oribos, seeking champions among her kin, blood elves forged in hardship and light to help aid the kingdom from this old threat rising. She told of a storm brewing back in Silvermoon, an encounter with lor'themar, Romoth, Aethys Sunreaver, and the champion.
These reports are alarming, Lady Liadrin. Tranquillion is in danger of being overrun by Scourge?
Their forces appear far too organized for this to be some random attack. Perhaps we should request additional aid from our Horde allies.
And waste more time awaiting their arrival? No, we must address this at once.
Then we must call up those still in training. We will hold the line and keep kael'thas safe. I swear it.
Very well. I will open the way and meet you in Tranquillion.
Liadrin's own instincts echoed Romoth's. She persuaded lor'themar to trust in their own, summoning even those still in training to the defense of their homeland. Among the eager young was Salandria, her adopted daughter and paladin in the making. Liadrin met her enthusiasm with gravity, warning that this trial would demand more from her than ever before. But Salandria was undeterred, and she vowed to rise to the challenge. With that, Liadrin dispatched her beyond the Dead Scar, instructing her to scout and report back from Tranquillion. Liadrin and her chosen champion then traveled by Romoth's portal to the haunted borders of Tranquillion. There, the undead gathered in numbers not seen since the first devastation of kael'thas. She called on the champion to help stem the tide, steel and light working as one against the endless dead. It was Aethys who uncovered the hand behind the Scourge attack, the Sand Lane Vorath. Word soon came from Salandria. At Deathhome, Vorath's true strength lay hidden, shielded by a crystal array that cheated even death itself. Romoth determined that only a weapon imbued with the proper power could send Vorath to the Shadowlands for good. Liadrin named the forged Ren Sur as their instrument of judgment and charged her champions with the task of empowering it. Calling upon the Kyrian of Bastion, guardians of departed souls, and the Maldraxi of Maldraxxus, masters of death's mysteries and how to unravel them. Through shadowed realms, Salandria and the champion traveled, returning at last with the Rancior blazing with new power. Liadrin wasted no time. She had the champion take up the blessed weapon to carve a path through Deathhome and seal Vorath's fate. In the crucible of battle, they prevailed. Vorath trapped and struck down, the scourge crumbling and scattering in the aftermath. The living had reclaimed their ground, and Liadrin declared that what remnants remained would be cleansed in time. With victory claimed, Liadrin led her knights and champions back to Silvermoon, calling them to the Hall of Blood to honor their triumph.
I will inform the Ebon Blade of what transpired. If the Scourge caused such problems here, I suspect matters in Northrend may be even worse. But regardless, your efforts must be lauded. When our lands were threatened, you stood strong and held the line.
You have demonstrated cunning, determination, and integrity. Hallmarks of what it means to be a Blood Knight. Accept this gift as a symbol of your dedication and bravery. We will never forget that your aid was instrumental in ending this crisis. For kael'thas.
For kael'thas.
In the wake of Farok's fall, when the echoes of the primal incarnate's fury had faded into uneasy silence, Lady Liadrin journeyed to the sacred grounds of Tyr's Rest, with Malar Dawnblade at her side. The land, once scarred by battle and sorrow, now seemed to breathe with cautious hope, a promise rekindled by the return of the Titan-forged Tyr, and the forging of his new order, the Tyr's Guard. Gazing upon the gathering of old heroes and new, Liadrin spoke with quiet conviction. She saw in Tyr's return a glimmer of a future where the wounds of the world might finally begin to heal. There was a rare hope, she mused, in witnessing so many disparate peoples, once divided by war and suspicion, now united beneath a single banner, their differences set aside for the sake of something greater. Yet in her heart, Liadrin could not help but weigh the promise of this new brotherhood against the failures of those that came before. Would the Tyr's Guard, born from fresh resolve and ancient legacy, succeed where the storied Knights of the Silver Hand had faltered? The question lingered as she watched banners rise above Tyr's Rest, the dawn glinting off polished steel in the eyes of those who dared to hope once more for Azeroth's redemption. In the aftermath of Dalaran's ruin, when hope seemed as fragile as drifting embers, Liadrin stood resolute at the head of the Horde fleet, sailing alongside Thrall toward the mist-shrouded Isle of Dorn. Their purpose was clear: to aid the shattered survivors of Dalaran and the embattled folk of Khazalgar, all now locked in grim resistance against the shadow of Xal'atath and the swarming Nerubians under Queen Ansarek's command. On the black stone shore, Liadrin and Salandria watched over the Earthen, guiding their training with the measured patience of those who had rebuilt nations from ashes. When the Nerubian tide rose to assault Hollowfall, Liadrin marched at the front of the relieving hosts. Her crimson tabard and steady voice became a beacon amid the chaos, her presence an unspoken promise that kael'thas had not forgotten the ancient debt owed to Erethdor. The battle was fierce, but in the end the defenders of Hollowfall stood unbroken. Liadrin and her daughter Salandria journeyed to the ancient city of Meroldar, where they were greeted by Regal Hornfire and the whispered legend of the Sacred Flame. For Liadrin, the true wonder lay not only in the flame's holy origin, but in its arcane resonance, an echo that stirred memories of Silvermoon's own mastery over light. So different from the solemn traditions of Stormwind, Salandria saw in it the promise of new ways to heal and defend, and Liadrin felt a quiet pride, knowing the torch she carried would one day pass to hands worthy of the legacy. And that's going to do it for Liadrin's history for now, but obviously her history is going to get expanded upon at midnight, and I'm sure something crazy is going to happen since her and lor'themar seem to be at the center of what's going on with the Sunwell. I look forward to seeing what happens there. But I did want to go over Arius. His history is kind of weird. So I feel like between BC and Cataclysm, the writers kind of forgot they used him in the Blood Elf questline for the Paladins. Because the original questline for each is fairly straightforward. In the Blood Elf version, the Blood Elf Paladin is being sent in to Stratholme to prove that their holy magic is, or their holy light usage is just as good, if not better, than everyone else's. So they want to prove their dominance. So they go into Alon's chapel, extinguish the eternal flame, they kill Arius and the paladin spirits that try to attack, and then supposedly that's the end of him. But that's not the end of him. Because in Cataclysm, he's still in Alon's chapel, and he's part of a quest line where you give him a sigil, I believe, and that sigil lets him leave the church to go and fight his father, if I remember correctly. And you go there, you fight his dad with him, who is Baron Rivendare. However, through that fight, Arius ends up getting killed, and he ends up becoming a Death Knight anyways later on. I believe in Cataclysm? I can't remember exactly. But basically, he dies at the end of both. And he specifically died in the BC one, so technically he shouldn't still be in Alon's chapel. However, I came up with some headcanon to make this work for me, because I went down a rabbit hole, and I was lost for a bit. So, during some fight, Arius gets infected with the plague. Now, from what I've seen, there's no real, set timeline. You get infected, 12 hours later, you're an undead or a Death Knight. Personally haven't seen that. I could be wrong, though. Now, unless, obviously, a Death Knight casts a spell on someone, then they get raised instantly, but natural infection takes some time. So from there, the Knights of the Silver Hand quickly think, and they throw him into the church, and they bring out the Eternal Flame, get that lit, and they allow him to stay human. However, he can't leave the church. The minute he does, the plague is going to start taking over, and in some time, he will become a Death Knight. So then later, the Blood Elf Paladin comes there, extinguishes the flame. He freaks out because he doesn't want to become a Death Knight. He tries to fight the Paladin, and then from there, he ends up losing to the Horde Paladin, and they end up leaving Stratholme, leaving Arius behind. So technically, he should be turning into a Death Knight, but in my headcanon, a Silver Hand Paladin comes in, rescues him, whether it's a resurrection or just healing him, gets the Eternal Flame relit, throws him back in the church, and says, have fun. And just kind of keeps him there until Cataclysm, where adventurers find him in the church again. They give him the sigil, he comes out, he gets killed, later becomes a Death Knight anyways, but that is how I kind of explained it to myself, because I didn't see any specific instance of a paladin coming in and resurrecting him, or a mention of him dying before or whatever. So that's kind of how I saw it, and even in the notes on the wiki, it says that he died twice, so that's kind of my headcanon for how it keeps a linear flow with him. But easy just to chalk it up to a writer forgot about him and threw him in there, and then they just kind of went with it. Either way, that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed, and please do take care of yourself. Thanks for checking it out.